What is up, everyone? Welcome back to CageChat MMA. We are here, of course, to discuss and recap UFC 282. So please drop the channel a follow or subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and or Facebook. We're on both platforms. We're on all platforms. So follow us on Instagram, CageChat MMA, Instagram, Twitter, etc., TikTok also. And let's discuss UFC 282. Of course, we're just under a week out after now, and obviously there's been a lot of talking points from Saturday night. There's a lot of talking points going into the card, of course, after we'd lost Yuri and Glover Teixeira. Obviously, Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev was then fighting for the title in a 5-round main event, for a vacant title also. But the controversy, or the controversial moments, lie with obviously Paddy Pimblett and Jared Gordon. Those were the big talking points from the weekend after what was a lackluster main event, or a more technical main event. I don't like the word lackluster. I don't think it was a bad main event, but the light heavyweight division and the heavyweight division also, they're sometimes when you get two heavy hitters, two technical fighters that are quite well all-rounded, it becomes a chess match. It becomes a tactical master class. It becomes a war of attrition, to bring out all the cliches. And that's what happened on Saturday night between Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev. It was two men that had obviously clearly trained for 3 rounds instead of 5, because in the 4th and 5th, you could see the gas tanks weren't there. And of course, learned about an extra 10 minutes, which doesn't seem a lot of time in reality, but when you're in there and when you're at that level, 10 minutes is a lot of time. And when you haven't trained for that, it makes a big difference. Now, obviously, Jan Blachowicz has been there in those particular settings with a main event with a title on the line. Obviously, Ankalaev has done it in the Apex, I believe, against Thiago Santos. So a lot of different pressures, but he's also been 5 rounds himself. But the fight played out almost as you expected. Of course, Jan Blachowicz, the tough, gritty fighter he is, the legendary Polish power, came out to battle. But he didn't really have enough to really wobble or topple Magomed Ankalaev. Of course, there was a leg kicks in the 2nd and 3rd round that really impacted Ankalaev. But once the 4th and 5th round came out, it was all Ankalaev. He recovered very well, very sharply, albeit he wasn't very offensive, but he got the takedowns in and he controlled the round, and he got the damage in the 5th round, concluding to a 10-8 round, which is something we can allude to in the Paddy Pimblett fight, actually. But Ankalaev done enough in those last 2 rounds to get the win, to recover himself from those very poor 2nd and 3rd rounds where he took a lot of damage. And you're clearly looking at a 2-2 with the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. Obviously, with the 10-8, it then makes it almost like a 3-2 in favour of Ankalaev, because at that point it'll be 39, 37, if my math's correct. At that point, or 39, 38, sorry. So it was a really down to that 1st round. Now, the 1st round wasn't the most damaging round, very similar again to the Paddy Pimblett fight. And I think because obviously we only went to the judges' scorecards twice on Saturday night, and that being the co-main and main event, most sort of talked about topics. Obviously the rest of the card, they weren't needed because there was finishes up until that point. But that 1st round was a bit here or there. Both had claims to win in that round. Both had successes in that round. And I feel Ankalaev, was hard done by. I thought he got enough of a decision to get it done. I thought he won the 1st round and won 4 and 5. And obviously with 5 being a 10-8, he's already 3-2 up at that point anyway. But it just puts that rubber stamp on the performance that I believe Magomed Ankalaev won. So he has got the right to be upset. Now, of course, neither of them covered themselves in glory post-fight. Neither of them covered themselves in glory during the fight, but even what they said after the fight was even worse for themselves than how they performed. Because again, when you have the result of that magnitude and that closeness, there's enough evidence there to run it back. Albeit it wasn't the most interesting or explosive fight that we've seen ever. But when you got a majority draw, similar to like the Wonder Boy Woodley draw back at 205, there's enough merit there to run it back. But obviously Jan Blachowicz said, straight after maybe he shouldn't have been interviewed, although it wasn't a knockout. Obviously, Joe Rogan doesn't tend to interview the losers that have been knocked out, but obviously in the main event it's a bit different. And obviously Jan Blachowicz didn't get finished, but he took a lot of damage in that 5th round. Arguably, similar to Dricus du Plessis and Darren Till. Enough to not warrant the fight, but enough to go, should we really be carrying on this one? It was right in that middle balance of stop the fight or, Blachowicz doing enough, which is indicated in the 10-8 round. So I can see why Jan Blachowicz came out and said, Ankalaev won because obviously he was frustrated with that 4th and 5th round being taken down as he done. There is, again, similar, a lot of parallels to him against Israel Adesanya. With Ankalaev using his wrestling in the later 2 rounds to get the job over the line, theoretically, albeit not indicated on the judge scorecards. So he obviously said what he said, and Ankalaev said, or mistranslated by what I've seen, said that he would never fight for UFC again, or he didn't know if he was going to fight for UFC again, but apparently it was just the city that he was in, of course, which was Vegas. So that was rough for him, and obviously when you say things like that, Dana White is going to come down hard on you. He's the boss, and you say, "Oh, I won't fight in the UFC again." He almost hangs you out to dry, and says, "Go fight somewhere else then." And that probably those 2 interviews. I mean, there's obviously contingencies in place by what Jamahal Hill said with getting the call while they were still in the octagon, getting their interviews taken with Glover Teixeira and now Hill fighting for the title in Brazil, which I think is a good decision. But I think those post-fight interviews with Joe Rogan for both of them shot themselves in the foot, and they worked themselves out of the rematch. And I'm sure Dana White wasn't too best pleased with what they said, especially on the pay-per-view broadcast. But Hill versus Teixeira is probably the best outcomes in all parties, maybe, because obviously Glover Teixeira was hard done by, having not been able to get his title fight against Yuri, not get his rematch back, not get his opportunity to get revenge and get that belt back around his waist after losing it to Yuri earlier this year. And a lot of people thought Glover Teixeira should have been in that fight, but obviously he got offered Ankalaev and he said no, with all due respect. And he was right to, because obviously Ankalaev has a lot of different qualities and possesses a lot of different powers that, when you're training through Yuri, who you've already shared the cage with, you want a fresh camp. You want to have a good 2-3 month camp where you can actually just take it in your stride and focus only on Ankalaev, whereas he's been, training through a dynamic striker in Yuri Prohaska, and Ankalaev is more of a technical striker with a very good ground game and a base with wrestling. So it's a completely different matchup. Had they offered him Blachowicz, who he's already beat, I'd imagine he would have taken that fight. But of course that didn't happen, and the belt's still vacant, and the UFC moves on, and rightfully so. It's within their model. And Glover Teixeira is now coming out on the other side of that with a title shot, where obviously he's not had the best. He would have had a good camp for Yuri, and obviously he's got to wait an extra month, so there's that. But he's got enough time in the bank to focus on someone like Jamahal Hill, who isn't too dissimilar to a Yuri Prohaska on the spectrum of fight styles compared to an Ankalaev. So it makes sense. And Jamahal Hill obviously got submitted by Paul Craig, which I'm sure Glover Teixeira will take some solitude from that, and some, maybe even some blueprints from Paul Craig as to how to beat him. But obviously Teixeira's been in there with the very best. And of course, he's going to be fighting in Brazil, in his hometown, not in his hometown, in his home nation of Brazil, at 283. It's not the main event of that card, of course, which is a bit harsh on Davison Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno fighting for the 4th time. But that's, a discussion for later next year, or beginning of next year at least. But it's a good fight. Hill, obviously, he's put some good runs together since that loss to Paul Craig. And he is deserving of a title shot, in my opinion. He's on the list of the available fighters right now. I know Anthony Smith has been hard done by, but on the list, you'd say he's probably the best there right now. To face Glover Teixeira, that isn't a Jan Blachowicz or someone we've just seen recently. You could say it's a bit of a favourable matchup in favour of Teixeira, but I think that it's hard done by. That robs Jamahal Hill of his progress. But I do really think that it's a good fight, and it's a good move to make for the UFC. It moves the division along very quickly and very appropriately, and that's good for the UFC because it means business continues. Obviously, it's the best of both worlds, because they would have had to not promise Glover a shot, but he deserved a title shot, and then you got Yuri coming back. So now this actually benefits all parties, because Glover gets his promise almost, even though it wasn't a contractual promise or anything like that. He gets his wish, and then when Yuri's ready to come back in 6, 7, 8 months, maybe 9 months, maybe he can slide straight back in, and maybe we get the rematch then. Or we look at maybe an Ankalaev versus Teixeira in 4 or 5 months' time, maybe June, July-ish. I'd imagine that fight could take place. So it opens things up. Obviously, Hill is on a 3-fight win streak. UFC 283. Obviously, the UFC are very good at moving on the ball very quickly, very fast, and coming up with plan A, plan B, plan C, as and when they need to keep their business running. And it's a good move for them. Anthony Smith again, hard done by, but his fight wasn't until March. With all due respect to him, so I think that's enough time. It wasn't like he was fighting tomorrow, let's say, on the Strickland Cannonier card, and they just gone, right, you just put 3 months work into a camp. We're now not beginning that fight. I doubt he would have started camp yet. Or he's obviously coming off that leg break to Ankalaev, or broken foot perhaps, or ankle within that area anyway. But there is obviously Thiago Santos is no longer with the UFC, but Anthony Smith is going to have to look at maybe an Alexander Rakic maybe coming back. Maybe Jan Blachowicz, maybe. I don't know if Blachowicz will be ready to return, but Anthony Smith versus Jan Blachowicz in London sounds pretty good to me. Also. But yeah, sucks for Anthony Smith, but this is the fight business, and the fight business continues. As it does for Paddy Pimblett. Now, Paddy Pimblett has become a very diverse character, probably for some good reason, for some of the way he's very open mind. Well, I would say open-minded, but he speaks his mind. That's more so the phrase I was looking for. He speaks his mind, and he's not afraid to let people know what he thinks. And obviously last week he let people know what he thinks of Ariel Helwani. Now, for good or bad, that wasn't a good move for him. Whichever side you sit on, or whoever you agree with, that wasn't a good look for him. Especially not talking to Dana White, who we know who's got history with, of course, Ariel Helwani. And it wasn't what he needed going into his 4th fight in the UFC, going into a co-main event slot, somewhat carrying the card, because he's one of the biggest and uprising stars in the UFC at the moment, and his name carries a lot more value. Again, you may agree or disagree with that, than Jan Blachowicz or an Ankalaev or a Santiago Ponzinibbio, or even probably Darren Till right now. His name carries a lot of value because he's the rising star in the UFC, and there's a lot of people that hate him, and there's a lot of people that love him also. He's got both sides like that yin yang. When you're only liked, sometimes it can be difficult because people like you. They don't want to see you lose, so they might not tune in. People want to tune in and see Paddy Pimblett get chinned, which is why they're advocating for fights or pushing for fights with the likes of Dan Hooker. Which, by the way, you put him in there with Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker does horrible things to him. I watched his video on Pub Talk, obviously with Oscar Willis and the Mac Life. Yeah, he does bad things. I know Dan Hooker's had a rough ride, but he's been in there with Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler. He's been in there with some of the very best in the division. Paul Felder. Obviously, Islam Makhachev was a fight he took on very short notice without a proper camp. Obviously, he tried Arnold Allen. That didn't work at featherweight. But, look what he did to Nasrat Akbaras. Look what he done to, recently, Claudio Puelles. He's still a top 15 competitor. And Paddy Pimblett's nowhere near the top 15. So let's park the top 15 chat. Let's not give him Tony Ferguson. Let's not give him a Matthews Gamrot or a Dan Hooker or anyone of that caliber. Let's park that from the one side. I know people want to see him lose, and that's where the problem is. People want to see him lose, so they want to see him get given the hardest opposition. But the logic doesn't work. The logic isn't there, and maybe it's a Twitter thing. But when you're saying he lost to Jared Gordon, you can't then go say, hell, he must fight Dan Hooker, he must fight Tony Ferguson, he must fight Drew Dober or the winner of this weekend, Bobby Green maybe. Because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logic. And from the UFC, they would have seen Jared Gordon, that performance against Jared Gordon, and go, hold on, we can't push him into the top 10 because he's not at that level yet. And he is only 27 years of age. So the UFC could have fought, 7-8 years with Paddy Pimblett if they wanted. So to put him in there with the top 15 and watch him get smoked would be a very bad business decision. Now, they have done that with the likes of Reece McKee. They've done it with the likes of Jai Herbert in some aspects. But then you look at, what they've done with Sean O'Malley and how well they've managed Sean O'Malley. And how, how they build him. And they're going to build, obviously, Paddy Pimblett in a more different way now. Of course, the the age gap of those periods of their careers is a lot different. John O'Malley started in the UFC a lot younger than Paddy Pimblett done. Although Paddy had the opportunities to, he just didn't take them. Maybe that's a level thing, but obviously, he said that's a maturity thing. He wasn't ready for the UFC. He feels ready now, and he's showing why he's ready with his performances. Maybe not this performance on Saturday necessarily, but previous performances. He looked like a UFC caliber fighter. And I was saying in the preview, it's very disrespectful when you say, when you say to Jordan Levitt, when you say to Vanjamini, when you say to Santos, I believe, or Vargas, that they're not UFC caliber, or because they beat him, the next guy is finally good enough to beat them. It's very disrespectful to his opponents and to Paddy Pimblett. So it's a difficult position for him to be in. And we'll talk about the fight in a minute, because I know I haven't actually spoken on the fight, but just reading through Twitter and social media, you get amped up, so to speak. And I feel like sometimes it gets hard done by, and maybe that wants to sway you towards the other side of the spectrum, but then he comes out and says things and does things that makes you slide the other end of the spectrum. So it's difficult. It's very difficult to pinpoint where your feelings are and your emotions are. But yeah, let's stop the top 15 chat. I watched Luke Thomas from Morning Combat and say, he isn't Conor McGregor. And it's right, no one is Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor thought Dustin Poirier in his thought fight and flatlined Dustin Poirier. Obviously, there's a lot of revisionism on Conor McGregor's career as well, but what he was doing up until Eddie Alvarez was phenomenal. And Paddy Pimblett isn't that. Paddy Pimblett is a rising star. He is someone who will make the UFC a lot of money if they promote him right, which they are. And he keeps his mouth shut at times, which needs to happen. And he educates himself, which also needs to happen, and learn and mature, and get better with his personal side of things. And his professional side of things, actually, in the cage. But, he could fall into that category of the Yoel Romero, of a Donald Cerrone, of a Nate Diaz and Nick Diaz, where they become cult heroes. Jorge Masvidal, I put into that. Where they're cult heroes, they're pay-per-view stars, they might get a few extra bonuses from the UFC because of their notoriety, because of what they bring to the table. So they might only need a 1-fight win streak or a 2-fight win streak to get themselves into a title picture. Whereas, the likes of Leon Edwards, Tony Ferguson had to go 13, 14, 15 fights before they even got a look in. But Paddy Pimblett is going to get his roses with the UFC. But they're not going to give him the Dan Hookers that we just mentioned of this world. And rightfully so. They're going to slow him up, build him up slowly. They would have seen Saturday and gone, right, Jared Gordon was a good test for him, a good level. Maybe let's drop it one back, or let's find someone who isn't as a polished striker. Let's find a Claudio Puelles. Let's have a jiu-jitsu match in London. That would be fantastic. A Jai Herbert. Jai Herbert's on a bit of a skit. Well, he's not found his footing yet in the UFC. Performance-wise, at least, or results-wise, even. Jai Herbert would be a fantastic. Mark Diakase would be fantastic. Someone in that ballpark, maybe a Bobby Green, but I think Bobby Green's too experienced to Paddy Pimblett right now. Someone in that 35 to 25 mark would be where I'd position him. Maybe not Michael Johnson yet. I think Michael Johnson, again, is too experienced. But yeah, the names I mentioned, Claudio Puelles, Mark Diakase, Jai Herbert, let's have some, all English battles in London at 286. I think that's the move I would go for. Ilia Topuria does bad things to Paddy Pimblett, so let's not even, cross that bridge yet. Paddy Pimblett had a fantastic performance over the weekend. But yeah, Paddy Pimblett, if they want to burn the Paddy Pimblett marketing spree, give them to Conor McGregor. If you're going to give them to anyone in the top 15, although he's just been taken out of the rankings this week, if you're going to give Paddy Pimblett to anyone to feed, give it to Conor. Because Conor and Paddy is almost, he isn't Conor in the cage, but he has the potential to be Conor out the cage and have that promotional value and have that. He's going to have, obviously with the Barstool deal, he could potentially have those sort of whiskey deals, those suits deals, maybe in different areas, maybe more urban fashion, maybe more sports clothing. Yeah, I know he's got a sports hydration deal with Applied Nutrition, so he's got value to the company outside of fighting. And if you're going to burn that bridge and give him to the Wolves, give him to Conor, because it works for the UFC. Obviously, Conor coming back in July, June-July-ish time for the International Fight Week. Those two sell a lot of pay-per-views. Those two sell a lot of tickets, and those two do a lot of numbers online. And obviously, Conor coming back, where is he at right now? Is he top 25 worthy? Is he top 30 worthy? I think a lot of people would still say yes. But again, similar to Paddy, because of what Conor says and does online, obviously he's got his own problems at the moment with his whiskey deal, ironically. Where is he right now? Obviously, returning off that leg break, but he'd have been out of the octagon for 2 years, and I think he put it in Allegiant Stadium. It sells at Allegiant Stadium. It's a good test to come back with, because if he loses to Paddy Pimblett, then obviously Paddy Pimblett's stock, rises even further, because you just beat Conor McGregor, albeit where the Conor McGregor's at, you've still got Conor McGregor on your resume. It's an intriguing fight for me from the fans' point of view, because again, both of these are heel sort of figures right now. Heel characters, the one of a better word, because obviously that's a very WWE sort of phrase, and both of them are heels. So where did the fans align with those when they tune in? That'd be interesting for me, how that story builds up, and how the interactions online build up with that sort of fight. And again, if Conor knocks out, goes and finishes Paddy Pimblett, does he almost become the hero again? Because he's beat the bad guy that everyone wants to see beat right now, and he takes the bit of a shine from Paddy Pimblett. It's almost like to use Nate's phrasing, you're taking everything I'm working for. And Conor comes back, takes this little bit of Paddy Pimblett's shine, and takes that, maybe not to build a title shot, but get back in the win column. And he is Conor McGregor. He only needs one or two, and to beat one of the rising stars in his division and within the organization, it's a fight worth looking at for the UFC, more so than the Dan Hooker or Tony Ferguson or anyone else of that nature. If you're going to try anyone, try Conor, because you get your rewards back, financially, etc. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on that. Do you think Conor McGregor could be someone Paddy Pimblett fights? Of course, both of them former Cage Warriors champions also, so there's also that. There's the Liverpool Irish thing. Obviously, Liverpool and Ireland are quite unanimous. They get on quite well, I believe. So it would be interesting to see. Maybe do it at Anfield if you could. Do it at Anfield, have half red, half green. And do you know how much money that would make if you put Conor versus Paddy in Anfield? He put it in Croke Park, but I know Croke Park and the other stadium have curfews, etc. So it makes it difficult. But put it in Anfield, have the new guard versus the old guard, the promotional writes itself. I'm selling myself the fight here of Conor McGregor versus Paddy Pimblett. I think Conor would win that fight, because we've seen the left hooks of Jared Gordon hit the chin of Paddy Pimblett. So if Conor still has that power of that left hand, he should do bad things to Paddy Pimblett. And he's quite naturally better all-rounder than Paddy Pimblett. He's got more experience. He's been there with the higher-level guys also. But it's a fight I'd be willing to look at. And a fight I'd be willing to watch more so than the Dan Hookers of this world. But let's actually have a look at the fight, because we've actually not looked at the fight over the weekend. The word robbery got thrown about a lot after Saturday night, and by a lot of credible people, a lot of people that at events week in, week out, watch events week in, week out. And if you look at unified scoring criteria, it wasn't a robbery. Now, I watched the fight the first time and I thought Jared Gordon won. I thought he had it 29-28. I put a tweet out on CageChat MMA saying it could be 2-1 either way, or it could probably be 30-27 Jared. If you're going to go that way, I thought Jared, especially the third round, it could be that, watching it in real time. But when you look back at the criteria, when you take the criteria into account, round 3 is Paddy Pimblett's. Now, that's based off damage. When you look at the criteria, it says damage is the number one factor in this sport, when you're judging the sport and judging fights. And Paddy Pimblett does enough. Obviously, Jared Gordon, and it's pretty good to retrospectively look at this fight backwards on the timeline of things. And I saw Sean from Severe MMA on the Anik and Florian podcast doing the same thing. Paddy Jared actually gets him up against the cage, but he doesn't do anything with that. And unfortunately, in the scoring criteria, clinching and that sort of grappling of not changing position, not striking, it doesn't count. Having control time isn't a high scoring factor within the criteria. So just having someone up against the cage for 2 or 3 minutes doesn't actually score. And when you got the person up against the cage elbowing you, punching you to the back, no matter how much it hurts or what visible damage does or etc., things like that, that's going to score high, because the judges can visibly see what's going on. They can visibly see a change in sort of the dynamics of the fight. because of the extra strikes being landed. So Paddy Pimblett wins that round. And maybe that's something that the criteria later down the line is looking at. The first round is quite comfortably Jared's, in my opinion. I don't think Paddy Pimblett, and Joe Rogan was right, Paddy Pimblett couldn't be that confident going into the reading of the scorecards, because Jared Gordon clipped him with a few left hooks that were very nice. But we've seen obviously Paddy Pimblett take those sort of strikes through and come forward. So not to be too lenient on the judges, but I can see where he took it, because he took him so well that there wasn't a knockdown, there wasn't any cuts or bruises or any sort of significant visible damage where you go, actually, that's a clear 10-9 to Jared Gordon. It was more, he's clipped him a few times, but he's not actually hurting. He's not putting him on the canvas or anything like that. And obviously, there was a lot of leg kicks from Paddy, more a few strikes, more volume, I believe, from Paddy. And we'll have a look at the stats, actually, because I've actually got the stats from the UFC, UFCstats.com, of course. But yeah, round one, 29 total strikes from out of 70 for Paddy, but 40 out of 61 for Jared. Now, I thought Jared done more damage with those, which is sort of reference with the significant strike, 32 out of 53 for Jared, but 29 out of 70 for Paddy Pimblett. And we'll actually have a look at the actual results as a whole as I read out the round by round. Round 2, 28 out of 70 for Paddy. Significant strikes, that is 24 out of 46 significant strikes to Jared Gordon. 47 total out of 89 from Paddy. 39 out of 61 for Jared. Obviously, Jared did get the takedown and 2 minutes of control time. But again, the damage is the more significant factor in what the judges are looking at. And he did have more damage there, Paddy Pimblett. So there's an argument there why he got the round. So yes, I believe round 1 was Jared's, and I believe round 3 was Paddy's. So that makes it 1-1. So that automatically takes out the possibility there of really seeing, a 30-27 Jared Gordon state there. That puts a 29-28 scorecard in the right paths. Now it's just how you see round 2. That's the more determining factor of who wins this fight than the more or the less obvious round to score in the fight. It's the tougher round to score in the fight, because you do have the damage there from Paddy Pimblett. He has a much better round than the first round, but obviously Jared Gordon, he lands a couple hooks, not so many in the first round, which is where it tightens up. But it's a very even round, and with the 2 minutes of control time, there's only 3 minutes to work for him within the damage, because I can't remember there being a lot of strikes on the ground. So yeah, that's the real determining factor. And I did give it Jared on the night, but I can see how Paddy Pimblett got given that score, given that round, and obviously winning the fight. The unanimous decision one, obviously with it being unanimous, it's difficult to really pinpoint the judges at fault, because obviously they're all reading off the same hymn sheet, so to speak, with the criteria. And there was a lot of talk about obviously Doug Crosby this weekend, because obviously he scored the Bellator fight between Sabatello and Rossi Stotts. Now that is a bigger issue for myself personally than the Paddy Pimblett fight, because the Pimblett versus Gordon fight probably highlights issues with the criteria more so than the actual judges. Now Doug Crosby is not the most favoured judge in MMA, and rightfully so probably. I've read a lot of articles about him this week, and a lot of there was things this weekend with fights that brings up a lot of questions. But the Paddy Pimblett Jared Gordon as a whole wasn't a robbery, wasn't a bad scorecard. It's just a very close fight, and I'm sure if you watch it 10 times, you might have it 6-4 either way. But Doug Crosby caused a problem this weekend with Sabatello and Stotts. Now, fortunately for Stotts, it was a problem that wasn't a determined factor in the outcome of the fight. But he scored it 50-45 in Sabatello's favour. And that's just not the case, because, again, in this scoring criteria, damage is the highest factor. Now, I believe I had it 3-2, and the other two judges did have it 3-2 to Stotts when I watched it on Sunday. And, 50-45 just didn't happen. And that's a problem with the judging. That's not a problem with the criteria. That's a problem with the judging. And because he's the descendant scorecard and the lone judge that went that way, that's the one that I had a problem with. And that's the one that you have to look at as a singular issue, because he clearly didn't do his job right on Friday night. He may have done his job right Saturday night, and there's discussions should he even be working Saturday night, if he'd been working Friday night in Connecticut and then traveling to Vegas the next day. But he'd done his job very poorly on Friday night, and Stotts is very lucky because one, that's in the Bellator Grand Prix, where $1 million is on the line in the final, and of course he's currently the interim champion, so he could have lost both his title and the chance of winning $1 million, and that's something that Doug Crosby can't be taken, too lightly on, because you're playing with careers at that point and playing with financial futures. Unfortunately, Stotts is going on to face Patchy Mix, who look fantastic in Bellator, and we'll have to talk about that a little later on in the recap. But I agree with Ariel Helwani and those that have said you can't be scoring cards or scoring fights within 24 hours in different organizations. Bellator 286, I think it was a 288, took place in Connecticut on Friday night, and obviously the UFC took place on Vegas on Saturday. So in 24-hour period, he's flown pretty much the other side of the country, from East Coast to West Coast. So, I believe there should be a 36-hour rule. I saw something with the governor of California, again from Ariel Helwani, saying that if you're, judging a fight past Nevada, that you can't be within 24 hours of judging a fight within California, which I agree with. I think that's a good rule. Now, of course, judges like fighters are trying to pay their way and make a living, and of course they're not getting the fruitful labours as a fighter. And then we talk about fighter pay, but the judges are getting even less, although they're able to fight a lot or judge a lot more frequently, because obviously they're not taking damage, etc. Similar to refs. But scoring a fight is a high pressure situation, and it's a tiring situation. And when you're looking at 10 to 12 fights on a night, I know they're not scoring, they're probably scoring 4 or 5 maybe of those. But high pressure situations, especially the main event on Friday night, you can't be then going to the UFC and scoring again another high pressure situation at the co-main event. Within 24 hours, and it needs to be a 36, 48-hour period. Maybe they even need to turn up on fight week with the fighters on a Wednesday. Maybe you book out the UFC, go right. We want you for this weekend. We're taking you from Wednesday, and maybe if there's an icon or something in let's say it's in Vegas again. Let's say there's something in Vegas at the Apex, they can score that. Or maybe they can go to California, which is an hour away or 2 hours away, maybe. But they can't leave that vicinity too long. Maybe that's a way of looking at it. But yeah, the Paddy Pimblett Gordon fight was very close. Doug Crosby, like James Krause, might have just set new boundaries within the sport. James Krause is a whole different situation, of course, but Doug Crosby, has his judging future at risk, and rightfully so, for what he done to Stotts, the disrespect he gave to Stotts. And again, there needs to be some education in here. There needs to be education to the fighters, because a lot of the fighters are coming to grips with the scoring criteria, but a lot of them don't know the scoring criteria. And that shows on social media. A lot of the media don't know the scoring criteria. There's a few that do, and again, a few that get into grips with it. But we're lucky in MMA because we have a unified scoring criteria. That doesn't exist in boxing. So we do all have work and somewhere to be able to review those criteria and all get on the same page. And then it comes to a point of, where is this criteria wrong for mixed martial arts? Because it is the boxing 10-month system that has been adopted for MMA. And it doesn't quite work because, again, Gordon has a legitimate claim for winning that third round outside the criteria. Because when you have control over someone for 3 minutes, that's a significant portion of the fight and portion of the round. And it is MMA. It's not boxing. It's not kickboxing where striking counts. It's MMA, and obviously grappling and wrestling is a part of that, and it should be scored as a part of that. And I know Joe Rogan comes up with this. Obviously, up against the fence, he doesn't like that. He wants to be almost on a mat, like in judo, taekwondo. But if you're, this is MMA. You should be able to defend the clinch and be able to get out of that position. If you can't, you lose that round. And I think that's fair enough. But there's something we need to look at, maybe at a more expanded score range. Maybe, different criteria needs to be met. Maybe you get control time over 3 minutes, it outweighs the damage. But we don't know, because if then he gets out of that 2 minutes and he knocks you down in the later 2 minutes, does it make it a 9-9, make it 10-10, etc.? It's a very difficult position to be in, but I think the sport is on the right path. I think the Doug Crosby situation needs to be dealt with. Then we look at the criteria, and then we can move on from that. Maybe expand the number of judges to 5. But again, Saturday's example doesn't change anything, because 3 out of 3 were unanimous in their decision. So are you just going to keep expanding until the person you believe won the fight was right? Does it take 10 judges to give Jared Gordon a 6-4 scorecard, or will they just be 10 out of 10, in favour of Paddy Pimblett? But I think, start with the Doug Crosby situation from Friday night, work out what we're going to do with that, and judges being able to score fights within 24 hours with each other. Then let's have a look at the criteria. How can we make it better for MMA, and how can we implement wrestling and grappling into a more a higher scoring criteria than we currently have, and then we move on the sport from there. But yes, again, something in me says that if it wasn't Paddy Pimblett and it was someone else that is more unanimously liked by the MMA world, I don't think it would have got much heat. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe this night needs to get heat to see the sport develop and grow and change, and be more beneficial. Had it been an early prelim fight that no one tuned into, or very few tuned into, then maybe it would be a different outcome. Maybe we just crack on as normal, because there's not much on the line. Well, there is a lot on the line for the fighters in the future, but in the grand scheme of things, in the UFC, it's not. Yeah, you can understand where I'm coming from. Where I say it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean as much as a co-main or main event title fight. Santiago Ponzinibbio caught a fantastic win against Alex Morono. Morono was comfortably 2.5 rounds up, almost coasting to a third round unanimous decision after the third round. But Ponzinibbio, similar to his countryman Lionel Messi, he got the hand of God, didn't he? And absolutely spun the jaw of Alex Morono, and came out with a fantastic win, moving him to 29-6. Dricus du Plessis broke England's hearts. Obviously, France broke England's hearts earlier in the day, and du Plessis came out and actually wiped out any more pain that we had when he beat Darren Till. And the Darren Till has had it rough over the last couple of months, over the last 18 months. Really, probably pinpointed to the Jorge Masvidal. He's not been the same since Jorge Masvidal. But definitely since the Robert Whittaker fight, he's had a lot of injuries, and it shows you how tough Robert Whittaker is, because he's an absolute nightmare. And it just shows you what going in there with Robert Whittaker does to you, unless you're Adesanya. But Darren Till has not been right, and it's a problem because he came into the UFC 5 years ago now. He's been in the UFC 7 years since he came into the UFC, actually, but 5 years since he's been on that sort of world stage level. And he was doing fantastic at welterweight. He's someone who maybe UFC had pushed too quickly, because he only beat Donald Cerrone and Thompson. With all due respect, they were at a much better stage in their careers than they are now. But then he got thrown into a title shot. Now, obviously, he was very brash, very loud. We were sort of in that Conor McGregor sort of entertainment era, which I think we're still in, but there's a lot more realism, I think, in the moment that sort of gets behind fighters at the moment. That gets fans behind fighters at the moment. But he got pushed into the Tyron Woodley fight. Obviously, he got choked out by Tyron Woodley. Then he got again on Jorge Masvidal, who was coming off a bad period himself. Obviously, got knocked out by Jorge Masvidal. We know he came back and he's coming gas something. He actually didn't want to fight on that night. He was scared. He still had those jitters from getting knocked out. He got a split decision win, which, if he not got that, he would be 0-6, wouldn't he, right now? But a good performance from him. He got the decision. Obviously, Robert Whittaker was a very good performance. Probably the best performance he's had since the Stephen Wonderboy win. And he was obviously on the unanimous decision end for that. Obviously, he had injuries with his knee since I had 4 fights cancelled. Obviously lost to Derek Brunson via rear naked choke, and then he done the same against Dricus du Plessis. And I'm actually saying it, there's only 30 seconds difference between the end of the fight with Brunson and du Plessis. Obviously, it's the same method, and that's worrying for Darren Till, because again, he worked hard for this camp. He was in Thailand for the whole period of that camp at Tiger Muay Thai, training with Brendan Loughnane, who's just become PFL champion. And you see the mentality that Brendan Loughnane has, and you see the work ethic that he has, and I think it rubbed off, at least on the physical side of it, for Darren Till, maybe not on the mental side. And we saw that in the camp or in the corner, with Brendan Loughnane screaming at Darren Till. Obviously, Brendan Loughnane is still on that high from becoming PFL champion, and rightfully so. And he was hoping that maybe that bond, similar to Till and Chimaev, had that bond, have their bond, that we have a bond with Till and Loughnane, and almost a brotherly love sort of relationship bonding. And I think it has. But obviously it didn't transition in the cage. No thought Brendan. I think Brendan done a fantastic job in the cage. It's more so Darren Till responding to it, but maybe not believing in what Brendan Loughnane was saying. And obviously that first round was the worst start that he could have had. He got taken down, he got his arm pinned up against the cage. Fantastic wrist control, fantastic game plan from Du Plessis, who's very dangerous. And he just pummeled him for 4.5 minutes of that round. I probably should have seen the fight stop, but obviously Mark Smith was taking a very close look. And Darren Till kept saying he was okay, kept doing just a little bit enough, but every time he tried to say he was okay, he took 2 or 3 more shots. So again, the worst start he could have had on Saturday night. Then obviously came out for the second round, looked a little bit better, looked a little bit less nervous maybe, not desperate, which he probably should have been desperate after that first round, because Brendan Loughnane screamed at him that Du Plessis had given him everything in that first round. And he probably had, because he was a little gassed out in the second round. And Du Plessis, he's shown tiredness against Brad Tavares, of course. That was a very close fight. He won a decision, but there was points in that middle round where he's tired. And I don't know if he's, he's a very muscular, thick competitor. Whether he has that sort of frame and that sort of genetics where he has a good 5 minutes, then he needs to really take that second round off and then come back for the third round. But if he wants to be a champion and fight for 5 rounds, I know he's been a champion at KSW prior, but at 28 years of age, if he wants to be in those high pressure situations in the UFC, he probably needs to work on his conditioning a little bit. But then who am I to talk about a professional athlete talking about conditioning? But this was a very good fight, because obviously both of these are similar stages in the career. Obviously a lot different in experience, not so much actually. 18-5-1 against 18-2. They're both in those periods of the career, but you can see the difference of a confident fighter and a fighter that's absolutely lost all sort of momentum and confidence that he once had in Darren Till. He's searching for it, he's trying to find it, and it just doesn't seem to be there. And as a British fight fan, especially we're in this period where we've got Arnold Allen, we've got Arnold Allen, we've got obviously the champ Leon Edwards, we've got Tom Aspinall, we've got Paddy Pimblett, we've got Molly McCann, we've got all these generational talents and fighters that, obviously born from the Michael Bispings and obviously the Dan Hardys of this world. It's a fantastic time to be an MMA fan for UK fight fans, and we've got UFC 286 around the corner, which if Darren Till had won on Saturday night, you probably would have seen him there. But unfortunately, that's not going to be the case, or shouldn't be the case anyway, because I think he needs to take a year out. Again, he's only 28, 29 years of age. If he took a year out, go to work with Chimaev, work on your wrestling for a year, work on your jiu-jitsu for a year, because that's the bits of the game that isn't there at the moment. Work on your confidence somewhere. Maybe leave the UFC for 2 years. Go work on your wrestling and that, but go. It's difficult, so I imagine he's on a huge wage, so he can't go to Cage Warriors. He can try PFL, but he's not active enough to fight 4 times a year, 5 times a year like Brendan done. So it only leaves Bellator really, or maybe ONE FC, if he wants to push it out there. But he's in a difficult position. Maybe KSW, but I don't know if KSW can match what the UFC are paying him. So it's probably best that he takes a year out, maybe, and just focus on himself. Maybe that's been a problem because he's not been active, because he's had injuries, because he's probably had injuries going into fight camps that he's not dealt with out of pride or whatever it is that's made him not put out on the fight. Maybe fighting Derek Brunson was the worst idea he could have done. Maybe he just should have got surgery and really recover and rehab from that. But we don't know. We don't know where he was at. But a tricky night for Darren Till, and I felt for him on Saturday night because he looked so positive and mentally strong going into fight week that it just all crumbled on him on fight night. Ilia Topuria was performance of the night. I know all the finishers got performance of the night bonuses, but Topuria was absolutely fantastic against Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell came out and said he got a flu, which may be the truth, but Topuria was just on a level above. His striking was too clean. He was too fast. He was too good. Even his grappling was too good. I know, you know, um, he's maybe more predominantly known as a striker, but he's got fantastic grappling nonetheless. And he showed why he's top 10 now. And it's a shame his countryman Giga Chikadze, those two won't fight, I imagine, because obviously being from the same nation. But I'd love to see that fight. I'd love to see that training session. But he's in there. He called out Brian Ortega, which is a good shout. Obviously, Calvin Cade is injured. I hope they don't give him Arnold Allen, because obviously we want to see Arnold Allen fight for Max Holloway, but you could easily see Arnold Allen versus Tapuri on that London card. Don't give them Paddy Pimblett, because he won't sort Paddy Pimblett, with all due respect to Paddy Pimblett. Paddy Pimblett, I've met him. He seems a sound lad, despite what we see have said about him today. Don't give him that fight just yet. Let Tapuri try and see where he can get to in this division, because he's got the potential to be a champion. Definitely a title contender, but certainly a champion. Obviously, it depends on what happens between Volkanovski and Makachev, and of course, then what happens between Josh Emmett and Yair Rodriguez. But obviously, got Max Holloway still there. Arnold Allen's probably next, but I'd imagine Tapuri is next in line. Obviously, got Mosar Evloev as well. Maybe you got Evloev versus Tapuri. That would also be a fight I'd be willing to really look at. Obviously, before debutant on the night, Raul Rosas Jr. making his full UFC debut after that stunning win in the Contender Series. He looked fantastic. He reminded me of Mohamed Mokaev at the start of the year when he made his debut at London, and that's a fantastic testimonial for IMAF, isn't it? And what the work IMAF are doing. They got Raul Rosas Jr. coming in, submitting Jay Perrin inside 3 minutes of the first round, and he looked phenomenal. He's got the confidence that an 18-year-old, maybe the naivety of an 18-year-old that he should have, but it comes across as confidence that an 18-year-old shouldn't have. He feels like he's 27, 28, not 18, and only recently 18 as well. He's got so much confidence. And maybe that'll be not his downfall, but he trips up, maybe gets a little bit too cocky. Similar to Mokaev, although Mokaev has got a little bit more experience, both in an amateur setting and professional setting. When he, at least till the point where he got the UFC, of course. But Raul Rosas Jr., I've been impressed. Again, when he was announced for Contender Series, there's a lot of talk about, are we really let a 17-year-old kid fight on the Contender Series? If it goes bad, it's a bad look for the UFC. It's a horrible look for the UFC. But he's come out and impressed, and he's won. And what they say, if you're good enough, you're old enough. And he certainly proved that on Saturday night. Again, he reminded me of Mohamed Mokaev's debut. Full dominance from start to finish. And, the bantamweight division's got a very new prospect coming up. Obviously, a lot of work to go. And again, no need to rush him. Although I think the UFC might want to start breaking that record for the youngest UFC champion. I don't know. Maybe that's something in their mind. With John Jones phasing out, maybe they want to not rewrite history, because that's impossible. But just get some fresh blood in there. I think it will happen because IMAF is so good. The amateur scene is so good with IMAF that they're getting that experience, they're getting those sort of nerves out of the way of being able to, one, make weight, but fight so consistently and fight in high pressure situations and against the best competitors, and they're fighting each other as well. So they only rise with one another as well. So the future of the sport's in good hands, but it just means that those top 10 will start getting younger, similar to football. And that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the prime was a 28, 27. If you hadn't made it by 25, 26, 27, you won't get it. Now, if you're not making it by 21, 22, Twitter calls you a fraud. So I hope we don't get it in the UFC, although we do get it on MMA Twitter. But everyone's getting younger and everyone's getting better, which is the nature of the sport. Because again, we're thankful that we live in a period where you can train MMA. But I thought you trained kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, and then you added the rest later on in life. Now you can just go into a class and say, oh, okay, I want to train MMA. It's a lot more accessible, which is good for the sport, and it shows the growth of the sport. Jairzinho Rozenstruik knocked out Chris Daukaus in emphatic fashion, very similar to how Ngannou knocked out Rozenstruik. Again, complete dominance from start to finish, and it makes me want to keep campaigning for a cruiserweight division in the UFC and within MMA as a whole. I know there's a lot of talk about 165 and 175, etc., but we need to be looking at 240, I think 235, 240, and we need a cruiserweight division in the UFC and MMA because it's not. Again, I don't know the science and the safety behind it, but no commission's going to put on a fight between Davison Figueiredo and Alex Volkanovski at their current weights, or Islam Makhachev versus Alex Pereira, although that's a little bit of a wider gap at 25 pounds. No one's going to make that gap. Chris Dawkins came in at weigh-ins at 282, at UFC 282 at 242.5 pounds. Rosenstruck was 261. Now, obviously, that's within the limit, and that's fair. But it's a £20 difference. Now, I don't know the parameters at heavyweight on a scientific basis of the dangers of that, but we know they're the hardest hitting, in the division or in the whole sport at heavyweight. We know what the heavyweights possess. So I think we need a cruiserweight division. I know Chris Dawkins is looking to go down to 205. With you just had a port of 240s. I think Curtis Blades is around that 240. Steve Hay was, DC was. You'd have to look at the looks of, and like the Herdich and Ankalaev maybe look to come up and go for 2-time world championship status. Personally, I think 230, 240, somewhere in around there is the mark to go, in my opinion. And that Rosenstruck knockout just sort of, cemented that opinion for me. I think we need to be looking at a 195 and a 240 before looking at, 165, 175, etc. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on that. Would you like a cruiserweight division in MMA and in the UFC? Edwin Shabazian back to ring, one in returns against Doucher Lungambula. Again, he looked fantastic, Shabazian. Obviously, he's had a rough time himself. Again, maturing as a person. Obviously, going in, I think he's 25 now, isn't he? Obviously, came into sport, the golden boy, very young. Similar to Rail and Makhachev and Aaron Blanchard, etc. A lot of pressure on his shoulders, obviously coming from the Ronda Rousey gym also. So again, that naturally came with even more pressure. But he was in there with someone he should be in there with. Obviously, no disrespect to Lungambula, but he was on a 3-fight loss streak himself. But the playing field was a lot more closed and a lot more even. He wasn't ready to fight Derek Brunson. He wasn't ready to fight Manson or Imavov. Those are within their prime or just slightly beyond their prime. And he's still very young in this sport, and he needs to be nurtured a little bit. That's where the UFC get the push wrong. They've done it well with Sean O'Malley, and I think they're going to probably get it right with Paddy Pimblett, but they got it wrong with Edwin Shabazian. And I'm glad that they've restocked and taken care of them and given him a good fight, and he looked fantastic. I believe he's at AKA now, or Extreme Couture. So yeah, he looked fantastic on Saturday night. Chris Curtis also looked fantastic with a knockout against Jacqueline Buckley. Billy Quarantillo, never in a boring match. Billy Quarantillo knocked out Alexander Hernandez via standard TKO. TJ Brown submitted Eric Silva via arm triangle, and Cameron Simon kicking off a perfect night, or what would be a perfect night for South Africa. Standard TKO against Stephen Kozlow. So again, UFC ended their pay-per-view year with an absolute banging card. 10 finishes. 2 controversial decisions, 1 less so, 1 more socially controversial than legitimately controversial, let's say. Whereas Ankalaev, I think, did get, not robbed, I don't like that word robbed, but he got hard done by nonetheless. And that moves on nicely to Bellator. Bellator 288 took place on the Friday, of course, before it. And it was it was a good watch. I watched the main event because obviously I'd heard and seen the whole talk about the scorecard, so I wanted to go and back and watch that fight properly. Of course, with it being part of the Grand Prix as well, it was important to watch. Obviously, Rothin Stotts looked great against Danny Sepatello. Close fight, not a 50-45. Let's not get that mixed up. But Stotts done enough, and he looked good. Patchy Mick looked fantastic against Magomedov, giving Magomedov his 3rd loss with a submission, guillotine choke. And Patchy Mick, he looked fantastic at 17-1, and I really liked what he said post-fight. Of course, he's had a title fight before, but he didn't appreciate it. Of course, he's only 29, and it was, I think, 2020 against Juan Archuleta. I think he got the title shot against, and he was just not ready enough. But he took that loss. He's taken those learnings. That by all means, No, he's got his camp there. He's got his team there. He's got Tatiana Suarez there. Who's returning this year. I'm hoping, and I'm sure that those two being together, of course, the sort of buzz that Tatiana's returning, and obviously vice versa for Tatiana, that seeing Patty Mix succeed and put his work at the gym has been a good confidence boost for her to get back in the gym and get back in the octagon herself early next year. But Mix looked fantastic, and I'm glad that he's talking. He talked like a mature fighter, a more mature man, and someone who's ready to go on and win that $1 million prize. I do think he's a little bit favourite against Stotts based on those two performances, but it's a great fight. Obviously, Mix also has a big advantage in height and range on Stotts, so that's going to be an interesting fight. And Liz Carmouche submitted Juliana Velasquez. Obviously, she took the belt from Velasquez, but they rematched, and Liz Carmouche came out on top, getting a second round win. And those are the biggest talking points on Bellator, really. Fantastic card night Bellator, and it leaves us looking forward to obviously tomorrow night. We've got Sean Strickland versus Cannonier, and then we've got Cage Warriors Europe versus USA on New Year's Eve, and of course we've got Bellator and Rising on New Year's Eve. Also, those are the biggest events of the year left as we tick down into 2023. And of course, following tomorrow, there's a 3-4 week break until the next UFC at the start of January, which is quite damning, isn't it? And for everyone involved. But yes, I'm going to leave it there, guys. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to hit follow on Facebook. Make sure to drop us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I'll see you guys on the next video.